Hey everyone, Pastor George here, and today we have for our mailbag question this question, which says, Morning, Pastor George, what does the Bible say about the separation of church and state? And that's a really good question, but it's also a very modern one, a very American one, even in the sense of talking about church and state as being two separate things. That is a much later thing that happened. So to take that type of thought and apply it to the Bible is a little difficult because at the time that both the Old Testament and the New Testament was written, religion and the state were always intertwined, right? Whether it was in Israel itself, right, because you had the king, we also had prophets and priests that were part of the regime, right? Part of the social order, and they were respected. You can see that in the relationship of David and Nathan, right? You can see it in non-Jewish empires at the time, like the Romans, right? I mean, one of the titles for the emperor was Pontifex Maximus, which is also the title for the Pope that he uses now, but it means great priest or high priest, right? And so these things were often related. I mean, you can even see it again in the Old Testament with David and with Solomon and their forward and other kings and their forward role in running the government. You see it even in non-monarchic settings where you have the judges, right? The judges are basically leaders of Israel that are lifted up by God to protect the people. And so you have it with Deborah, you have it with Samson, you have it with Gideon, right? A lot of others. And there they also are these divinely appointed figures who have religious significance alongside being secular leaders, right? So it's and you have, of course, as time marches forward, right, the church engages with the state, and the closest thing that I can get to kind of answering your question is what Jesus talks about in the Gospel of Mark during his famous parable, where he says, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's, or render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and unto God's what is God's." And there you actually see that there is a separation between you owe some duties to the government and you owe duties to God, and those two things are separate in the sense of like the government doesn't equal God, right? Because for a lot of people it did, right? The emperor was a god, therefore it was divine rule that you had to pay attention to, right? That gets picked up in some ways by Christians who are looking at the Old Testament and see that God does appoint kings, right? And the New Testament talks about, that leaders, that governments are appointed by God. And so kings in Europe and kings in other places in Africa, like Ethiopia, end up taking on a sacral role as the leaders of their kingdoms, not being the same as priests, but still being these people who are thought to be ordained by God. And so you have a huge mix of church and state there. And it's only when you get to the Enlightenment that you start to see this being questioned. And of course, what you're quoting from, the separation of church and state, or there's a wall between church and state, comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in, any of the founding documents, right? The closest we get is the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment to the Constitution, which talks about how Congress shall make no law that requires religion, right? Religious testing, and it's not establish a national church. But interestingly enough, that didn't mean that states didn't have churches. In fact, New Jersey had a state church. Many of the colonies, almost all of them at the time that they became the United States, had state churches. The last one was North Carolina, which I believe ended in the 1870s or 1880s or something like that. So in the United States, I mean, I think it'd be almost impossible now, and this would probably be challenged at the Supreme Court, but law is written. You can actually establish a state church in your state. So if we wanted to, have some poll, I can't imagine this happening, and amending New Jersey's constitution to make the Presbyterian Church the state church of New Jersey, that's completely doable. Now, as far as what the Bible has to say about this, I mean, that's something that Christians have been arguing over since forever, right? Every Christian realizes basically that unless they have other, I will say, political machinations. I think it's pretty hard to read the Bible and not take away the idea that government has been something that's instituted by God for the living out of His law, right? And for punishing of evil, right? That's kind of the government's role. And Christians have debated about how involved the church should be in that. From people saying the church should be an organ of the state, right? There should be a state church, like in England, where you have the state church, and that is the official religion of the government. And you can use, and England doesn't do this, but they could, I guess, in theory. And you can use the power of the state to promote only that church and get rid of all others. You have Christians who say no, there shouldn't be any, right? The church should stay far from government, because government has a corrupting force on the church, right? And you'll have people make these arguments all over the place, and people in the middle as well, right? Who maybe want some religious instruction, officializing of the religion from government, but they don't want, the whole thing as well. So there's a lot of debate, and a lot of it goes back to looking at parts in the Bible, people looking to Israel in the Old Testament and saying, hey, we should be more like that, or people saying, well, actually, it didn't really work out for them, so let's not do it that way, right? The Bible, in the way that the question that you pose, is very hard to give you an answer on what the Bible says about it, because the Bible doesn't say anything. It's kind of like asking, what does the Bible say about dating, right? It's a concept that's not really there in the Bible. You can draw teachings to apply it to dating, or to how we should view the church and state and their relationship. But to say that, what does the Bible teach about, it's not quite as easy as that. I wish it was, because I could make this video a lot shorter. But what I would say is, like, that's kind of for everyone to figure out for themselves. My own personal take on it is that I mean, I think Christians of good conscience can be all over the place. I see I don't personally think there's a big deal of having some relationship between the church and the state. Certainly in the United States, on a more micro level, I don't think that's a big problem. But at the same time, I'm really big on, as you know, toleration, and not like forcing everyone into one church by forced conversion or persecution or anything like that. I think that the Reformation and the experiences of our spiritual ancestors show us that is not the way to best live out Christ's message. But that's for everyone else. It's for you to decide whether you do agree with me, or whether you want to take a harder stance or a softer stance, or whatever. But that was a good question. Definitely a different. So keep sending me questions. I'm starting to run out, so I could use more. I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I will see you on Sunday for worship. Peace out.